This happened on a Monday night. I had just gotten home from work around 8 p.m. Ever since my divorce a few months earlier, my house felt empty most of the time. I didn't really have much to do after work, so most nights I just went online and played games with my friends. Honestly, it was one of the few things that kept me entertained. That night there was supposed to be a huge thunderstorm. The weather warnings were talking about heavy winds and possible flash floods, but where I live those warnings happen almost every time it rains, so I didn't think much about it. Around 11 p.m. I was in the middle of a game with my friends when suddenly a powerful gust of wind slammed into the window right next to me. The impact was so strong that the entire house shook. I pulled one side of my headset off and immediately heard the storm raging outside. Rain was pouring down heavily, and the wind was so strong that the wooden structure of the house was creaking and groaning. I turned back to my computer to tell my friends what was happening, but right at that moment my screen went black for a split second and the lights flickered. Then everything came back on. I asked my friends if they could still hear me, but before anyone answered, my entire PC shut off. At the exact same moment, every light in the house went out. The house went completely dark. It was so dark that I couldn't even see my hands in front of my face. I felt around my desk until I found my phone and turned on the flashlight. The small beam of light barely lit the room. Annoyed, I got up and walked downstairs to check if the power outage was only affecting my house. I went to the front window, but it was hard to see anything outside because the rain was pouring down so heavily. Most houses in the neighborhood were already dark since it was late, so I couldn't tell if their power was out too. I quickly messaged my friends in the group chat telling them I probably wouldn't be back online tonight. Then I decided to grab the old battery bank I kept in the basement. It wasn't powerful, but it could power a small lamp so I wouldn't have to sit in total darkness. Using my phone's flashlight, I slowly made my way down the basement stairs. The basement was mostly used for storage, so it was full of old boxes and random stuff. I found the battery bank on a shelf and picked it up, but just as I turned to leave, I thought I heard something behind me. It sounded like something shifting between the stacks of boxes. I stopped and slowly turned around, shining the light into the dark corners of the basement. Nothing was there. At that exact moment, the wind outside got stronger and the house creaked loudly. I told myself it was just the storm making the house move. So I carried the battery bank upstairs and plugged a lamp into it in the living room. I've never liked sleeping in a house without electricity. Something about the silence and darkness makes the whole place feel uncomfortable. So I opened the blinds, sat on the couch, and started scrolling through YouTube on my phone while watching the storm outside. About an hour passed like that. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me, so I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. Luckily, the roof above blocked most of the rain. The storm was still intense, but while looking across the street, I noticed something strange. A couple of houses had lights on, which meant their electricity wasn't out. That confused me. I went back inside and checked online for power outages in my area, but I couldn't find any information. Then suddenly my phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. The message said there were down power lines in my area and that power outages were expected. I thought it was strange that I got a direct message like that instead of some official alert, but I didn't think much about it at the time. I went back to sitting on the couch. A few minutes later, I heard something, a very specific sound, a creaking wooden step. It sounded exactly like someone stepping on the basement stairs. I had lived in that house long enough to instantly recognize that sound. My heart started beating faster. Slowly, I stood up and walked toward the hallway where the basement door was. The house was completely dark except for the small beam from my phone's flashlight. When I turned the corner and shined the light down the hallway, I froze. The basement door was open, wide open, and I knew for a fact that I had closed it earlier. I walked slowly toward it and pointed the light down the staircase. But there was no way I was going down there in total darkness to check, so I quickly shut the door again. I walked into the next room trying to calm myself down, but something in my gut told me something wasn't right, and then suddenly heavy footsteps exploded from behind the basement door. Someone was running up the stairs. Without thinking, I ran back to the door and threw my entire body against it just as the handle started turning. Whoever was on the other side immediately started pushing against the door. Then they began slamming their shoulder into it repeatedly. The door shook violently. The problem was that it didn't have a lock. I held the door shut with all my strength. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and started dialing 911. The moment the call started ringing, the pounding stopped completely. After a few seconds, I heard footsteps slowly walking back down the basement stairs. I didn't wait any longer. I ran outside, jumped into my car, and drove across the street to wait for the police. About 10 minutes later, 3 officers arrived and searched the house. They didn't find anyone. Whoever it was had escaped through the back door, but the most disturbing part came later. The police confirmed that the message I received about the power outage was fake. There was no power outage. Someone had manually shut off the electricity to my house, and the text message came from a private phone number. Which meant one thing: whoever broke into my house already had my phone number. A few years ago, I went on a camping trip with my best friend. I'll call him Henry. We had gone camping a few times before, but we still considered ourselves beginners. Usually we stayed at local campgrounds where there were other campers nearby. But this time we wanted to try something more adventurous. We wanted to experience real camping deep in the forest, far away from other people. After doing some research online, we found a place about 3 hours away from where we lived. The campsite looked amazing in the photos. It was on top of a hill with a beautiful view of the forest. The only catch was that it required a 4-hour hike through the woods to reach it, but that actually made it sound even better to us. So we packed enough supplies for 3 days and started the trip early in the morning. By midday, we reached the end of a long dirt road deep in the forest. There was a small open area where people could park their cars before starting the hike. When we arrived, we noticed something strange. There were no other cars parked there, not a single one. At first, we thought maybe we were just lucky and the campsite wasn't busy. The trail started near the edge of the parking area. It looked like it had once been a proper hiking trail, but it clearly hadn't been maintained in years. Some parts were overgrown with plants and branches. Still, we started hiking. The deeper we went into the forest, the quieter everything became. After about 4 hours of hiking, we finally reached the campsite. It wasn't anything fancy, just a grassy clearing on top of a small hill surrounded by thick forest, but the view was incredible. You could see miles of trees stretching out in every direction, and most importantly, we were completely alone. At least that's what we thought. We set up our tents and unpacked our gear. Henry took a little longer than I did, so while waiting for him, I walked over to the edge of the hill where the view was best. As I stood there looking over the forest, I noticed something moving far below between the trees. At first, I thought it was an animal, but then I realized they were people. Through the thick branches, I could barely see them, but it looked like a small group, maybe 4 or 5 figures slowly walking through the forest. That surprised me. I didn't expect to see anyone else this far out here. I tried to point them out to Henry, but by the time he walked over, the figures had already disappeared deeper into the forest. We shrugged it off and went back to setting up camp. For the next few hours, everything felt normal. We relaxed, talked, and enjoyed being out in nature. Eventually, the sun began to set. We built a small campfire and sat around it while the forest slowly turned dark. For the first couple hours, the night was peaceful. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the quiet wind moving through the trees. Then suddenly we heard something else. Voices. Very faint voices. They were coming from somewhere deep in the forest. It sounded like several people talking to each other, but we couldn't make out what they were saying. The voices were too far away and too quiet. Henry and I looked at each other. Neither of us said anything at first. We just listened. The strange thing was that the voices didn't seem to move. They stayed in the same spot out in the forest for several minutes. Then suddenly they stopped, not fading away, just completely silent. The sudden silence felt extremely unsettling. About a minute later, we heard something else. Footsteps, just one set of footsteps walking toward us through the trees. A few seconds later, a man stepped out of the darkness and into the light of our campfire. He looked normal enough. He had long, wavy black hair and was wearing a red baseball cap. He walked up with a wide smile on his face. "Hey," he said casually. "Do you guys know where the trail is around here? I've been trying to find it for a while." I pointed in the direction of the trail and told him it was just down that way. But something about the situation felt strange, so I asked him something. "Are there other people out there with you?" For a split second his expression changed, then he smiled again. "What other people?" he asked. "The voices we just heard in the forest." He glanced toward the trees and shook his head. "I didn't see anyone else. I've been hiking alone all day." That didn't make sense. We had literally heard multiple people talking in the exact direction he came from. But I just nodded and said okay. After that, he smiled again and started walking down the trail. Once he disappeared into the darkness, Henry and I looked at each other. We were both thinking the exact same thing. That guy was lying. There was no way he came from the same direction as those voices and didn't notice the group of people. But the more disturbing question was why he lied. For the next half hour, we sat around the fire discussing it. The whole time I had the strange feeling that someone was watching us from the forest. Eventually, Henry spoke up. "Maybe we should just leave." At first, it sounded a little paranoid, but the longer we sat there, the worse the feeling became, so we decided to pack up and head back to the car. Just as we finished putting our bags on our shoulders and stomped out the fire, we heard a single crunch of leaves behind us. Both of us turned around immediately. Without the fire, the forest was completely dark. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my flashlight and turned it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, and then we saw him. Standing about 10 or 15 feet away from us was the same man with the red baseball cap. He was just standing there, completely still, already staring directly at us. For a moment neither of us moved. Then slowly his face stretched into that same wide smile again. That was enough. I immediately turned off the flashlight and both of us ran as fast as we could toward the trail. As we ran through the dark forest, we heard something terrifying behind us. Footsteps, not just one set, multiple sets of footsteps. Some of them were running through the woods beside the trail. For several minutes, we kept running as fast as possible. Eventually, the footsteps started to fade away. Finally, it was just the two of us running through the darkness. We made it back to the car and drove away immediately. Neither of us spoke much during the drive home. To this day, I still have no idea what those people were doing out there in the forest, but one thing is certain. After that night, we never went camping again. This happened in the spring of 2021. I'm a 24-year-old male studying at a college out of state, and I decided to go home for spring break. The drive would take me about 2 days, mostly on long, boring roads. I left early on a Tuesday morning, excited to see my family. I had no real plan for overnight stops, just a rough idea of where I might stay. After driving nearly 10 hours straight, stopping only for gas and food, I finally decided to rest for the night around 8 p.m. I pulled into a small gas station to find a hotel nearby. Using a map, I discovered a tiny old hotel just a few minutes down a deserted side road. It looked like it hadn't changed in decades. Its faded sign flickered faintly, and there were barely any streetlights to guide the way. The area was eerily quiet, no cars, no people. I parked in the empty lot and carried my bags inside. The lobby was dimly lit, almost uncomfortably so. I didn't see anyone at first. The walls were yellowed and slightly peeling. The only sound was the faint hum of the old overhead lights. After a minute, a woman appeared from the back hallway. She seemed startled to see me, but quickly composed herself and checked me in. She gave me a room at the very end of the corridor. The room was small and simple, nothing fancy. I didn't bother unpacking. I just dropped my bags on the bed and sat on the sofa, scrolling through my phone. A few hours later, around 11 p.m., I was abruptly woken by loud banging on the door. My heart jumped. The room was dark except for the faint glow from the streetlights outside. I hurried over and opened the door, but there was nobody there. I looked down the hall, empty, silent. Shrugging it off as someone else in the hotel, I returned to the room and got ready for bed. I double-checked the locks, ensuring the door was secure. I set my alarm for 8 a.m., hoping for a peaceful night, but it wasn't over. Around midnight, the banging came again, louder and more insistent this time. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the door. Again, no one. I crept into the hallway, peering left and right. Still, the hotel was quiet, too quiet. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I decided to investigate further. I walked down to the lobby. The same woman at the front desk was still there, staring at me with a confused expression. "No one was here," she said softly. "You're the only guest tonight." I froze. The bangs, the hallway, the eerie silence. How could that be? I returned to my room, nerves stretched thin. I made sure every lock was in place again and got back in bed. I tried to relax, scrolling through my phone, telling myself I must be imagining things. Then my screen lit up and I saw it. In the far corner of the room, a shadow moved. I bolted upright. My chest pounded as I saw a figure standing there, perfectly still, watching me. I stumbled toward the door, fumbling to unlock it. Footsteps suddenly rushed up behind me, fast, heavy, deliberate. My hands shook as I swung the door open and ran down the hall. The woman at the desk jumped, startled, as I sprinted past her. But before she could even react, the man was there, following. His footsteps echoed ominously through the empty lobby. I didn't stop. I burst out of the front door, the cold night air slapping my face. He didn't follow me out, but I didn't dare look back. I ran to my car, shaking violently, my heart hammering in my chest. Later, the police arrived. The hotel only had 2 working cameras, one in the lobby and one outside. Neither captured much. All they could confirm was that the man had slipped into my room while I was talking to the desk clerk. No one knows who he was, why he was there, or what he wanted. All I know is that for a few terrifying minutes, I was completely alone with a stranger in the dark, and I had no way out but to run. I left that night, never to stay in that hotel again. To this day, I still don't understand what happened. I can only remember the feeling of dread, the silent lobby, and that dark figure standing in my room, watching me.